welcome to Plum Island, a vulnerable gem with Dyke Hendrickson. My name is Bethany Grafterow. I'm the Executive Director of the Museum of Old Newbury, and it's my pleasure to be part of the volunteer team of the Newburyport Literary Festival. This is our 17th year of bringing authors and readers together, and now it is my great honor to introduce Dyke Hendrickson, who is an author journalist who lives in Newburyport. His most recent book is Plum Island, a vulnerable gem. It will reach bookstores in June. It includes 75 color photos and focuses on the dual nature of the barrier island. The northern sector is inhabited by homes and small enterprises, and the southern portion by the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge. Both face major challenges because of climate change. Hendrickson is the author of Merrimack, the Resilient River, and hosts a weekly podcast titled Life Along the Merrimack. He has written seven books. Please join me in welcoming Dyke.
Well, thank you very much, Bethany. And it's good to be here talking about Plum Island. I did finish a book on the Merrimack River last year, and this I was continued to be interested in this area. We moved, my wife, Vicki Hendrickson, and I moved here in 1985, and we have always been fans of Plum Island. So the book that I wrote about was based on the fact I have been a journalist for 4 decades. So from 2012 to 2017, I was with the Daily News, and I covered many news stories about Plum Island. Some of them were rather grim. Erosion would come forth and houses would literally tumble off of the dune and go into the Atlantic. Others were more uplifting. As we know, each spring, much wildlife comes back to the Parker River Wildlife Refuge. So I put together a book, some of its history, some of its interviews, some of its stories. And I think it's important at this moment in time, the northern section of the island, which you can see here, it faces one set of problems. Much of it is under duress from erosion and high seas. Houses have been dismantled, some have fallen into the ocean. This is not stopping. Now, this is a minority of houses there. And if you're on the basin, as you can see now, you're doing pretty well. But many houses are under duress on Plum Island, and folks are trying to remedy that. In the southern part of the 11-mile island is the Parker River Wildlife Refuge. And I think you can see that stretching down in this photo. There's an enormous amount of marsh. There's an enormous amount of water, and it is one of the strongest and best areas for birds and wildlife to come. It's a route that migrating birds take. And in terms of challenges that the refuge people have, they're concerned that climate change might alter the way birds come here and might alter the amount of liquid and marshland that there's there for them to utilize. So you have the north having its set of challenges, the south having its set, but even so, Plum Island is a wonderful place. It was discovered in about 1605 by Europeans, we're saying. The Native Americans had been going there for centuries, for summers, by Samuel de Champlain, the Frenchman. The Frenchman didn't stay, however, and the English did. And we'll see in a bit later, John Smith, an Englishman, was one of the first up the river. He created a map of the North Shore in 1626, which I will show you in a moment, which is a darn good map. And so it's been an exciting place for a long time. And the Merrimack River is the birthplace of the Coast Guard. The Merrimack is the place where the Industrial Revolution started in 1822, when the first mills went up in Lowell. And one of the first labor successes, organized labor successes, happened in Lawrence in about 1912. So this is a very historic river. Plum Island is a very historic island. And as we'll see, there are many things to be very interested about with the island. And I'm so excited to have some photos. Steve Atherton, who lives right here in Newburyport on Plum Island, has many aerial photos. And here's one that shows the south end of the island during heavy seas in winter. It's a high tide, and you can see how blustery conditions could be. And in fact, many ships and fishing boats ran aground or just broke up off of the shores of Plum Island, which we will talk about. But you can see in a vigorous day of weather how difficult it was. And I've never, before I saw this, I had never conceived of that circular area, which must be centuries old. I mean, there's a geographical name to it, but it does show part of the island we never see. And one reason I love doing the book is because we have many aerial photos. This is one part of Plum Island that I guess many of us really appreciate. We get out of our cars, we walk up to the dunes, and right up over this dune is a beautiful ocean. This photo was taken by Dan Grovak, who lives on the island. He's a wonderful photographer. That's not his profession. He's an executive in the health field and promotion industry, but many of his pictures will be shown here. So Dan, I want to thank, Steve Atherton, I wanted to thank, and also Brian Eaton. They have contributed photos, and it's just wonderful that they're part of it. Here is Plum Island at dawn. I don't know if you people get up at dawn. I haven't seen too many of these, but isn't this beautiful? A Dan Grovak photo. Plum Island has a rich history, and starting in about 1890, people started coming out to the island, even if they didn't have a home there. And here you can see a wonderful day. This was a postcard. This came from the archives of the Newburyport Public Library, which incidentally has terrific archives and very, very cooperative and knowledgeable people. I love this. People are dressed up. It's a day at the beach, and it must have been fun going out there. Now, this was, bad things happened to good shippers in those days, and the Coast Guard had many ways to try to save vessels off of Plum Island. And here's one. This is a Lyle gun, and this was about, say, 1870 or so. They would take this gun, as you can see, they would put a large metal claw on it, and they'd shoot the claw high into the air, so it would hopefully land beyond or near that vessel you can see out there. The folks on the vessel would attach it to the boat, and then the Coast Guardsmen could bring it in. Now, I love the photo, but I don't know the statistics on this one. If it was successful, if it wasn't successful very often, but they did try. And I'm just thinking in some of those wicked storms that come and, from December through March, if, how accurate it could be. That could be one of my next projects. How often did this actually work? But this was an early technology and life-saving. Here is a crew at Plum Island, as you can see. There have been many Coast Guard stations at Plum Island, mostly at the north end, and they've gotten wiped out over the years. In fact, within 20 years or so, there had been one wiped out. So in 1973 or so, the Coast Guard decided we're going to leave the point of Plum Island, since there's erosion, there's storms, it's difficult. And they went right down on Water Street. And you may know that it's down behind the art center. But here is a crew ready to be helpful. And I think, as we mentioned, the Coast Guard was created with, well, it's the birthplace of the Coast Guard, and was the revenue guard at first, and it wasn't until 1915 that the name Coast Guard came in. But Newburyport is the birthplace of the Coast Guard. Well, people used to have fun long ago, just like we do today. Here is a picture of the Plum Island Hotel. That is what we call the center now. That part when you drive down Plum Island Turnpike, and you're basically, you come to the ocean, and there were many, not many, but there were hotels there. There were different spots. And if we're talking about 1890 to say 1915 or so, there were a lot of hunters that came there, hunters and fishermen, and particularly the hunters were popular. And people would get their ducks or their geese, and they'd come, and it was a great place to have a party, and a great place to just enjoy the time. And one of the most interesting things for me, as I looked into the history of Plum Island, was that there was a railroad or a trolley, as you can see here, in the 1890s, say, to about 1921. And it would leave from downtown Newburyport. And in those days, a lot of people did not have cars, and maybe they didn't want to take the horse down that day, so they could get on a trolley. At first, in about 1880 or so, there was a trolley car, we'll call it, and it was pulled by about 8 or 10 horses. It could fit about 18 to 20 people. So they would get on right at the firehouse in the middle of town, and they'd come down for the day, and they'd bring a picnic and have a picnic, and there was a dance hall there, and then they could get a trolley home. It sounds like a great deal, even today. And I think you can see that lighthouse, which is still there today at the north end of Plum Island. But there was a good transportation system then. Also, this was another postcard. This was a theater right on Plum Island. This trolley would take you out there. And so I think there are many aspects of Plum Island that were quite lively. And they would bring people from the city onto Plum Island. Again, there weren't as many cottages there, and there weren't as many cars. So, when this trolley began in about 1895 or so to 1900, the horses no longer drew the people out. The trolley brought the people out. And that went to about 1921 or so, when cars became widespread and not so many people would get on the trolley, but it's quite a moment in history. Here is the Carlotta, which was on Grape Island, which we can't get to by car. It's kind of across the Plum Island River, but there was a little colony out there. This was a powered boat, but Newburyport was a great shipbuilding community, as I think you might know. In the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, it built thousands of ships. And by then, I mean there were some tall ships with 3 and 4 and even 5 masts, and there were smaller fishing vessels. But it was a great shipbuilding place when in the age of sail. But Newburyport really did not get into building steamships such as the Carlotta. Many of them were on the river, say from 1910 to 1930 or so, even later into the 50s and 60s. But Newburyport has a very shallow entrance to the harbor. And so if they built iron and steel vessels, they might not be able to get them out of the harbor because they're too heavy. And if these vessels came back loaded with cargo or people, they certainly would not get back. So remember that it's a narrow opening to the harbor. It's shallow, 14 to 16 foot draw, depending on the tide. And also there are sandbars that come by from time to time. So this is a vessel that was on the water, but Newburyport didn't build many steel vessels. This is the wonderful Plum Island Pavilion. I alluded to it before. They had dances there. They had music there. As I say, it must have been fun to have a picnic, go dance, take the trolley home, or, on your horse if it were. Now, one of the elements of the pavilion and many things in this community was fire. That wonderful hotel we just looked at a moment ago burnt down in 1913. They rebuilt it, and it burnt down again in 1915. And so here the pavilion eventually burnt down. Now, a pavilion did exist into the 30s and 40s and into the 50s on Plum Island for roller skating. A couple people would roller skate, and 2 nights a week they'd be dancing. My old tennis partner, Dick Canepa, who is an octogenarian and therefore somewhat older than myself, remembers going roller skating there, and he would have been, in 1950, he would have been about 15 years old. So there was dancing in the old days, and then there was roller skating, and a lot of fun and a lot of public access. We did talk about tough times and boat wrecks, and the number of shipwrecks off of Plum Island is extraordinarily large. Maybe it's that way for every port, but at the Custom House Maritime Museum is a chart which shows when different vessels went down, and there are 60 to 80 denotations of large vessels such as this that went down. You can see the Coast Guard folk trying to get out there, and there were many cases of guys couldn't get off, or if it's cold December through November or January, if they went in and didn't get immediately to the shore, they would freeze to death, or have all sorts of different ailments. But I have a whole chapter on that, written by, if you're a historian in town, Euphemia Smith, and she was one who wrote about, and she wrote her book about Newburyport. Vale Smith, Euphemia Vale Smith. I get my 1850 historians confused. Anyway, she wrote in 1854 how many vessels were going down. And she only wrote one book, but it's terrific. It is at the library. And one thing I've always been amazed at is, throughout the year, the shipping industry was active. They brought lumber down from Maine. They brought granite down from Maine or New Hampshire. There were always heavy cargoes. And, in the age of sail, when it works, it's a beautiful thing. But if the cargo shifts, or you need to have some flexibility inside the half moon, which we really have at Plum Island, it's a very difficult thing. Hundreds of shipwrecks took place off of our area. And here is, the wonderful lighthouse that's still there. I notice this is from March of 1926. We still have a lighthouse out there, and it's still fun to look at. I love the aerial photos that we were able to assemble. This is Reservation Terrace. This is on the north part of Plum Island. And this is an area under duress right now, because if you can see to the upper left of this image, that's the South Jetty. And when the South Jetty was refurbished in about 2014 or 2015, a lot of erosion started occurring right at the base of that. And so we'll see some pictures in a moment of houses like 78th Street or so are getting, or 79th in that area, are getting water right under their front porches. And that's because the two jetties have evidently, changed the way that the sand is moving. So the sand is moving away from Reservation Terrace, which is bad for those people, but it's accumulating below the South Jetty to where, houses were being threatened in years past. So there's an old saying around here that, there aren't two people who quite agree on how the tides work, or if they're going up or down, or exactly what's going to happen if, new jetties are put forth. But we got new jetties 6 or 8 years ago. It does seem to change the way the erosion is working. And, people read about, and I'm saying nowadays, why are these people building out on the end of Plum Island near the jetties? And I ran into an engineer down there. We were just talking, and he said, well, 2 or 3 years ago, when they were planning these houses, they didn't know this. They weren't thinking about that their area was going to change in topography, and that their sand was going to disappear and their dunes would begin disappearing. So it's a human thing on one hand, that they didn't know that suddenly their dunes were going to disappear. On the other hand, if you've been around for a long time or you come from a different environment, you know that a lot of storms can happen on Plum Island. A lot of bad things can happen. But we're hoping that those people at Reservation Terrace can, get through the spring and have a good summer out there. And here's an example farther down. This is on Annapolis Way, I believe, in Newbury. And this shows, number one, the surf can get high. But beyond that, in recent years, after say 2015, 2016, the homeowners started to bring in many boulders. So to keep the sea back and to keep the sand where it was. It's unclear that that's going to be successful over the long run, but they felt they had to do something to save their homes. And this one on the right, it has girders that go down 35 feet. And so that's Bob Connor's house. I don't know if you know the name, but he's an activist, very nice guy. In fact, he's very media savvy. And whenever there's a big storm, the TV stations from Boston will come up. He invites them in, they're having cocoa, they're taking shots off his porch. And he even orders pizza. I mean, this is how media savvy he is. Give the media free food and you'll probably get a good story. Just joking. I was a media guy, so I can say it. But Bob does a good job. But you can see that the storms do come up into the front yard. Here's a wonderful photo that shows some of the boulders towards the bottom of this image, and up towards the top, you see some houses that are closer to the Atlantic. That is the center that you're looking at. There's always been a snack bar there, a parking lot. And then you can see the basin, this is a good shot of the basin. And my understanding is at one point where the basin here at the top, where the basin almost reaches the Atlantic, at one point that was open. That was where the Atlantic came in. And the aperture we have now wasn't there. But I haven't seen photos on that. That was like 2 centuries ago. I just mention it because sometimes real, smart people bring it up and I don't quite know the answer, but I have figured out that was an area that the river kind of met the Atlantic right there, but that has changed many years ago. But you can see some of the boulders on the bottom, and that's what the inhabited area look. And the basin is beautiful. We'll see a few more of those things. And this is just a quiet day, which many of us probably have had out at Plum Island. In the foreground, a couple people have taken off their sandals and have gone walking, but this is Plum Island on a pretty day. The beachfront, there's always been a snack bar there in the town of Newbury, has tried to appear to be more welcome to folks who come to the island, and there's thousands, as you might know, that come to the island. But it's a period of time where a lot of people would like to park on public streets in Newbury and Newburyport, but there are many no parking signs. And that's become a bit of a contention because, the people who live on the island want town and state and federal support. So the ocean doesn't overwhelm them, and that's taxpayers' money. So if you live off the island, you're saying, well, geez, they want more tax money. Why can't I park there? So that is ongoing. That's been there for a long time. Here again is an example of boulders coming in. The state environmental and Fish and Game have never gave anyone explicit permission to do this. They didn't say they couldn't, but they never gave permission. So Senator Bruce Tarr, he's a Republican from Gloucester who headed up the Merrimack River Coastal Commission, at one point said, I know you guys are doing this. There may be a time when you might have to remove them, but no one's going to say no at this point. So I don't know if, I suppose the boulders will always stay, but it is changing the look of, the beautiful area. I did mention this. This is 77th Street, as you can see. There's several no parking signs here. And as I say, people come down and wonder why they can't park. In fact, when I worked at the paper, this fellow from Lawrence says, I'm from Lawrence. I brought the wife and my 4 kids, and I parked my car off the road, it's a public road, and I get a ticket for $90. What do you think of that? And I said, well, have you called the police department? Maybe there's a mistake. And he said, I called the police department, but they said, you're lucky you weren't towed away. And so anyway, there is a bit of a challenge about parking. And of course, here's, a wonderful shot. We all miss summer. This is at the Parker River Wildlife Refuge end of town. There's a couple gulls trying to steal your potato chips and your sandwich, but there are also a lot of people swimming. It's a great place to be. Here is a shot from the basin. I think you saw where that was. The water is warmer to swim in. It's easier to launch a boat. And people who live on the basin side are very gifted indeed. We were talking about challenges on Reservation Terrace. And here's from about a year or 2 ago. The city of Newburyport put in enormous canvas bags with sand in them, but this clearly didn't work. And one of the frustrations for environmentalists was, okay, not only did not it hold a storm back very well, but these plastic bags just ended up floating into the sea and made it more polluted and difficult than perhaps it should have been. But people are trying to hold the ocean back. Here are a couple houses, again, near 77th or 78th. There, and you can see that the ocean is getting very close. Here you can see high tide has come under this house. It's a new house. And this was taken in the fall. I took this in the fall when I was loitering about. But since then, several more storms came and this house has been condemned. It hasn't fallen down, it kind of crumpled, but it's been condemned. So the ocean is still rising. Now, I didn't use a lot of pictures of devastation of houses that's taken place in the past. I could have filled a whole book with them. And you've seen books and newspaper photos, but I didn't want to go back to the past and to all those unfortunate times. I want to show how pretty Plum Island is and what an asset it is to our community. And you can see there's quite a few houses with the large boulders there. And here's a great institution from Plum Island. This is the Charros Boating and Fishing Enterprise. In the foreground, there's a Charros boat. They send fishing boats out. They sent whale watching boats out. Now, one night I went out to the Isle of Shoals and there were 40 guys in the boat, and they were 40 guys. And I don't think there was a woman who loved drinking beer. And the only problem was we only caught 2 fish. Now, that isn't the Charros problem. It is our problem. We were probably not very good. But that was my only time fishing off a boat, because if you have 40 people and you get 2 fish on the boat, they were blues. That wasn't a very big catch. And again, here's a shot. You can see in the foreground on the right side, the house is just about to fall in. This is before the changing of the jetty. And this was when this area was, as you can see, in 2013, the ocean was getting very close to the housing. And again, that has changed. The new jetties came in. These houses now have more sand than they've had in a decade, but the houses at Reservation Terrace are now under duress. And this is one of I think this was the last of the old hotels in Newburyport. It's actually built in Salisbury, and it was boated across the river and ended up here at Plum Island, the north end of Plum Island. And this was for sale actually in 2012 or something, but it was totally broken down. A family bought it, they couldn't fix it, and it was torn down. And this isn't from a recent one, of course. This is about a century ago, but that did last until about no, to about 20,012 or 14. And here's, you can see there's about 1,200 residences on Plum Island. And it's thickly settled, as they say, but only on the northern end. And here you may have heard of the swan, the sparrows or the swans or the birds coming back to Capistrano. Here's some wonderful swallows coming back to Reservation Island on Plum Island, and they come back every year, and then you can see some of the pretty houses in the background. And this is a gorgeous site. Dan Grovak took this. Dan Grovak must have get up very early in the morning, but then I think he does have drones. So maybe he just lights up a drone at, I don't know, 10 o'clock the night before, and it sets off at 4. But isn't this a beautiful shot? It does show you how narrow the aperture is of the harbor. That's very narrow. And when you have a tide coming in from the west, you have a strong current coming from the east, it can make for a very choppy area. And many boaters have said that this is one of the hardest harbors to deal with in terms of entry. Now we're at the southern part of the island. This is the Parker River Wildlife Refuge area. And it's great facilities in the last decade or two. You know, building with restrooms has been built. There's a lot of areas to rest, to park a car. This is a beautiful spot. And here's Sandy Beach at the southern end of the island. It's actually a state beach. And I love to go to Sandy Beach, except there's only about 14 parking spots. So if you don't get there very early, you're not gonna get a spot. So one day I got there, it's, I don't know, 8:30 in the morning. I thought that was great. And the lady at the gate says, you know, you came here last week at 9:30, now it's 8:30. I told you, you've got to get here before 7 if you want to get a spot. 14 parking spots, but it's a beautiful place, I must tell you. And here's some beautiful birding area. This is Hellhole at the Parker River Wildlife Refuge. Now, Parker River Refuge is actually the #3 bird watching site in the whole country. That's true. In fact, I wrote a story about it, which is in the book. Cape May in New Jersey is #1. And there's a Texas spot, I think near Galveston, it's #2. But Plum Island is #3 for bird watching, with over 300,000 people coming in a given year. Now, here is the map that John Smith put together in 1626 that I bragged about earlier. For 1626, this is a pretty darn good map. You can see the Cape on the bottom. You see Cape Ann a little farther up. You can see Cape Elizabeth in Maine, which has ignored a few details, but nevertheless, what a great map for 1626. So the English settled here, not the French. Newbury was settled in 1635. In 1764, Newburyport broke away and became Newburyport because they wanted to, you know, they had a nautical way of life, fishing and boat building, and the folks in Newbury were basically farmers and merchants. So they broke away in 1764. Here is one of the true heroes of Plum Island, and she isn't that well known, and I hope my book makes her a little better known. Her name was Annie Hamilton Brown, and she was from Stoneham. She was a bird watcher. She was wealthy. And when she died in 1929, she left a bit of her fortune to be land to be purchased for bird watchers. She left about $100,000 in 1929. That went to some of the federated bird clubs. And so they owned a lot of land on Plum Island. In about 1942, the federal government came in and wanted to take a lot of land so it could be a bird watching area, a sanctuary. Now, this created an enormous amount of friction because the bird watchers, you know, were thrilled at Plum Island, but the bird hunters were greatly annoyed that they were going to use the great place. And so lawsuits were filed. it even got to the desk of President Harry Truman. And so a compromise was finally brought out. Plum Island ended up to be about 4,700 yards, which is to our benefit. But it all started, or partly all started, with Annie Brown giving that good money so that there could be a wildlife refuge. Here, many of us have seen these signs. At some point in late spring going to July, much of the beach is halted so the plovers can procreate. And if you're not from the area, and I've heard many people say this, why can't I go down the beach? Because the plovers are procreating. Why can't I take my dogs on the beach? They're tired. We've driven up from Boston today because the dogs will get in the way of the wildlife. So there's many complaints about this, but if you live around here, you know that a good part of the Refuge beach is closed off until late July so the birds can procreate. Here's a map from the Refuge staff that I have put into the book. And I did that because I don't think most people know exactly what they can do and what they can't do, or where the places to go are. Now you can see there's still hunting there. You can see the beaches, you can see the areas that you can walk to. So I thought this would be helpful. And on the left, there's an index of where things are. So it's not an artful photo, but I thought it might help some readers coming to town. Another great hero of Plum Island is Rachel Carson. You may know the name because she wrote the terrific book, Silent Spring. And that was in 1962. But in 1947, Rachel Carson came to Plum Island to study the black duck and also to study how to stop the diminution of the black duck. Black ducks are disappearing. And she was with the U.S. Fish and Federal Game. So she's a salaried employee. They said, go to Plum Island. So she was here in the autumn of 47, wrote great treatises on the black duck. But there was a lot of friction there. And some of her friends said, you might want to take a gun out there or take a guard with you, because a lot of bird hunters don't want to give up Plum Island. They want the whole island for. So she said, I'll do okay. But according to one of her biographers, she did take a flask of whiskey on cold autumn days. So if you're not packing one thing, you're packing another. And she did a great essay on the black duck and preservation on Plum Island, which I put in the book. And I'm just happy that I knew that she was, very much involved in the death of DDT. That was a chemical. It killed a lot of mosquitoes, but it got into the systems of birds, and the eggshells got very thin, and the little eggs, the fledglings, could not come to life because the shell was too thin. So she actually found that out, wrote it up. She was a very brave woman. She was derided. She went to testify in Washington, and the congressman would kind of laugh at her, and scientists from DuPont and wherever who made DDT would, put her down. But, she just kept her courage and prevailed. And in 1972, DDT, about 10 years later, was outlawed. But I say she was brave, not just because she faced everyone down in Washington, but she had cancer for most of this time. And the book came out in 64. I think she died in 60. The book came out in 62. She died in 64 or so. And so for much of this political travail, she had cancer. So I think she is one of the bravest women I have heard of in this arena. If you go to the Refuge, here's another area you can walk, you can look for birds. It's just a beautiful area, Plum Island. Here is the black duck that she was trying to defend. They were disappearing in the mid-40s. And she said, look, why don't we just say hunters can hunt in part of this area, and we'll have most of the refuge where you can't hunt. And if you remember from the graphic of the map we just saw, you can still hunt on Plum Island. It's just in certain places. And it just saved the black duck, and now there's a lot of them. Now here's a beautiful scene seen at the Refuge frequently. The Canada geese And it looks like a nuclear family here. Now, it could be a mother and father, it could be two fathers, it could be two mothers. I didn't go too deeply into this family. Anyway, it's a great shot, and there's a lot of good things to see at Plum Island. Wonderful birds. And isn't this a wonderful shot from Dan Grovak again? He's lives on Plum Island. It's a snowy owl. And most people are very happy if they can see a snowy owl on a fence or, on a pole or something. But Dan caught this snowy owl in flight. And isn't that a beautiful thing? Now, here's a little plover. We were all young ones. No, really. And this is a little plover. There's about 32 pairs of plovers. They're trying to procreate right now. So, but here's, one of these photos. Dan Grovak took this, and I thought this was so charming. I've got to get this into the book. And there are many egrets and ibises and herons out there, and many of them are quite easy to see. This is a wonderful shot of Plum Island, and of course, it's a great place for photographers, for bird watchers, and for kayakers. There are numerous spots to put a kayak in, and here's high tide at Plum Island, and some kayakers are going out. And it just shows you, this is a very heavy element, as I think you can see. This is dawn. It's been a big storm, and it blew it all the way up on land. So you can imagine how strong the storm was. And again, photographers love Plum Island. They get out, they take photos. So motorists must be pretty careful when they start going around. And again, here's a plover. The ibis is one of the great birds of the area, and they come here. PBS had a series show on the ibis not long ago. It's the best thing I've seen on not just PBS, but on any television. It's an hour long. It wasn't from our areas, from the Connecticut River, but it just talked about the ibises. I mean, they come up about March or April, and they make their nests, and they are off to the races. The Plum Island Airport is not actually on Plum Island, as you probably know, but it started in 1909, which is very early, considering the Wright brothers only started about 1903. It was off about a mile south to where this is, but it really was one of the first airfields in the country, because there was an inventor, a wealthy inventor, lived in Marblehead, which was not conducive to fields. But the Plum Island Airport has a terrific history, and you can take flights out of there at any time. I did mention the Coast Guard's value, and this is a photo taken several years ago off of Plum Island. And they're all strapped in. No one fell out. There were no entries. But every year, the Coast Guard, helps boaters, it helps fishermen, and helps recreational folk who run out of gas. They're a big institution here in Plum Island and have helped many people over the years. Again, a beautiful shot of the Plum Island area, the Merrimack River. And, from the air, it certainly is a beautiful spot. And this is one of my favorite photos. Dan Grovak took it. If I were to put a title to this, I might say, Fish Under Duress, or Pogies in Fear, or something like that. This took place, a humpback whale off of Plum Island in the last year or so, had found some fish, and he was making good of it. So these are some of the photos. I tried to mix wildlife with housing, with birds, and that was part of it, of putting together a book about this situation. And there's so many views of Plum Island and the lower Merrimack River. This is one of them. And I just thought I'd have that and show there are many trips out in the summertime, cocktail hours or sundown cruises, and this is certainly one of them. And this is the author. This is myself, without the hat, of course. And it's a situation where I've written 7 books. This is one of my most exciting. And I just enjoyed doing it. It's going to be out in June 27th, I think. And I'm looking forward to talking about it. So many people love Plum Island. I think we'll have a lot of people who are interested in a book on it. Again, it's as many nice, colorful photos as I could get in there. My publisher, who is in England, actually does color photos. He was the fellow who started Acadia Books and the History Press, which you folks might be aware of. Now he started another imprint called Fonthill Media, but this is in color. So I feel fortunate that my book on the Merrimack River was in color and my book on Plum Island's in color. Excuse me.
Thank you so much for that presentation and for those wonderful images. They really are striking.
And I'm just going to see if I can pull this up. But if there are any chats or any questions.
Yep, there are a couple questions in the box here. So while we're pulling that up, let me just ask you, we have a question from Beth Welch, which you, I think, answered probably after this question was made, which was about the when and why the creation of Plum Island Airport. So I think you answered that one. And I will also say, having been the previous property manager for the Spencer Pierce Little Farm, the current airfield was located there in the 1930s. I think 1933, it was first opened for any commercial traffic. And then 1937, it was open to all commercial traffic. So there was a, that's that answer. I'll help you out with that one. And can you say what streets the theater and pavilion were located on?
I think they're down at the center, right where, I don't know, about 12th or 14th Street. They were right where where you would run into the ocean if you came straight off the highway. So it was easy to get to. You could, it was a beautiful spot. I've never seen any other photos of it. I should probably do more with it. But I was intrigued to see that there was a theater and a trolley out to the theater and a trolley out to the end of the island. So again, it was in a period of time where most people didn't have cars, but they found their way to get out there.
Excellent. All right, I think we have time for one more question. Can you speak a little to the process of the change from Plum Island being the entire length to 8 miles being a refuge? I always wanted to know about how that all began and how long it took. That's from Rochelle Joseph.
Yeah, it happened in about 1942 when the Federal Fish and Game took much of the land to the south for a wildlife refuge. And they were very adamant, the feds were very adamant. They took it from people. They also, by eminent domain, they also took some of it from clubs and from different people who owned land there. And later, and I think as the 80s, they also continued their their desire to have just, wildlife, because there was a polio camp for polio patients out there. And when it closed, the feds said, all right, we're not opening it. We're not giving it to anybody else. So it was 1942 is the point of demarcation when the feds said, we are taking this. It's going to take us a while to get it. As we say, they fought with the hunters. They lost some of it. There was a compromise, but 1942 was the change.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dyke. I think that's all we have time for.
Are there any chats that would be useful to bring out, or I'm not sure how I can utilize that?
Yeah, no, there were a lot of comments, just little point clarifications, and they are, and a lot of folks telling you that they appreciate it and they can't wait to read your book. So
okay,
I think you covered it.
Right. I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear any chatting. So anyway, but Bethany,
virtual chatting is nice and silent.
Yeah, I'm getting used to virtual everything, I guess. But thank you very much. This is the cover if you're still watching. And Bethany, thanks a lot for hosting. You did help me out quite a bit on the tech side. Thank you.
My pleasure. It is always my pleasure to be part of the Newburyport Literary Festival. And I would like to take a moment to thank everyone on the planning committee for the Literary Festival, who work all year to bring these events to all of you. So please support the festival if you can, and have a wonderful rest of the day, Dyke, and
Okay.
all of you out there. And we'll see you throughout the year, but definitely next year at the Literary Festival. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye all.